on the Kashmir issue, 1 year after the removal of autonomy under Article 370. With sincere efforts by Rahul Mishra and Abhishek Tiwari, founder of PBF, we are fortunate enough to have Dr. Aman M. Hingorani with us today. Pro Bono Foundation is a noble step towards the betterment of people who needs social legal help. We have organized many webinars with great personalities. It has helped over 8,000 migrant workers to reach their native place, including all the necessities that they needed. And we are opening a public library in Mirzapur for aspiring students and have an inquisitiveness to read. Anyone who wants to help might send us the books from the wish list. A little hand may be of great help and bring white smiles on their faces. Our speaker today is Aman M. Hingorani, and he's a practising lawyer and mediator at Hon'ble Supreme Court and the High Court of Delhi, and an arbitrator at PHDCCI. Dr. Hingorani has been adjunct faculty to teach students and has run training courses for judicial officers, lawyers, law teachers, and students at several institutions in India like ILI, National Judicial Academy, Bhopal, Campus Law Center, and abroad also. Dr. Hingorani has previously addressed national and international audiences on the Kashmir issue, and his celebrated book, Unravelling the Kashmir Knot, published by Sage Publication, which received rave reviews from the former justices of the Supreme Court, journalists, and diplomats, for which unique perspective on Kashmir. Dr. Hingorani has been writing on Article 370 in the days following its abrogation and has more than 60 publications on diverse legal issues. Pro Bono Foundation is fortunate to have you on our session, sir, and witness what you have to convey to our participants. Sir, you may now start the session.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and good evening to all of you. Well, thank you for being here. Kashmir issue itself is a very wide area, and in India we somehow equate it with Article 370. Now, as you all perhaps know, that Article 370 as originally enacted has been in a way abrogated, has been replaced with another article. And the challenge to that replacement, which happened on 5th of August last year, is before the Supreme Court. So, given that the matter is sub judice, it perhaps wouldn't be proper for me to get into the move by New Delhi to do what it has done. We would probably need to wait for the view of the Supreme Court. But as far as I'm concerned, 370 is not the Kashmir issue. What has happened is not going to help resolve the Kashmir issue. I have said in the writings, as we mentioned on Article 370, that the genesis of the Kashmir issue does not lie in 370. The resolution of the Kashmir issue does not lie in 370. In my view, 370 is quite irrelevant to resolving the Kashmir issue. And to be able to justify that, one must understand what is the Kashmir issue. People understand Kashmir issue differently. As far as the Indian political class is concerned, Kashmir issue equals to 370 plus asking Pakistan to stop the cross-border terrorism. According to them, that's what the Kashmir issue is all about. That 370 comes in the way of development, comes in the way of peace, comes in it's a excuse used to create trouble in the state, now union territories, and Pakistan is guilty of exporting terror. So the Kashmir issue is equivalent to getting rid of Article 370 in the way it was originally framed and asking Pakistan to stop doing cross-border terrorism. If that happens, New Delhi seems to be happy. As far as the army is concerned, 370, the Kashmir issue is basically a law and order situation. So you have ASPA, you had TADA, POTA, you have laws which empower the security forces to do whatever is necessary to maintain law and order. So Kashmir issue is seen in light of the law and order problem. For the Kashmiri Muslims, 370 was the index of autonomy and their dignity. And so by getting rid of 370, you've robbed them of the dignity. That's what they feel. That's what they would feel. For Kashmiri Pandits, Kashmir issue has got nothing to do with all this. For Kashmiri Pandits, the fact that there was ethnic cleansing, the horrible happenings in 1990s, they were made to leave the state and become refugees in their own country. Till date, they're displaced. So for them, Kashmir issue is that. For those in Jammu and Ladakh, the Kashmir issue basically is uneven development in the former state. Those in Jammu and Ladakh say that why should we have the political hegemony of the valley? We are a larger territory. Because everybody is pampering those in the valley, there's not been an equal development or representation in the state. So they see Kashmir issue in terms of the heterogeneous nature of the former state. Kashmir is completely different from Jammu, which is completely different from Ladakh. And according to Jammu and people in Ladakh, they've been discriminated against all these years in context of the valley. As far as the international community is concerned, Kashmir issue is a tussle of territory between India and Pakistan. And the international community is quite fed up with this longest ongoing kind of issue, which can threaten world peace because both Pakistan and India are nuclear powers. So Kashmir issue gets defined from the perspective of the person who's involved. Each of these perspectives is important, but according to me, and which I've discovered through my research as an academic exercise, right from 1995 onwards, according to me, Kashmir issue is none of these. And to be able to appreciate why I'm say so, what is the reason for me to say so, what is the crux of the Kashmir issue, it does become important to go back a bit in history to see why was this issue created, how was it created. And it is only if you know what the problem is, then you can think of the way forward. So that is the background by which I would like to start. According to me, whatever has happened in J&K since August 5th last year is completely misdirected. I'm not on the motive of the government. They may have the best of motives. I'm not on the legality of what they've done. That's for the Supreme Court to see. But according to me, it's not going to resolve the Kashmir issue because 370 was never the Kashmir issue. So what is the Kashmir issue? So let's try to understand from there, from where we start. Let's make that as the point of departure. As you all know, Jammu and Kashmir was a princely state. We had two kinds of territories which were being ruled by the British before they left in 1947. One was the British provinces, and then when we had after the first War of Independence, 1857, the East India Company's role came to an end. The British Crown took over. You had the first Government of India Act of 1858, and the Queen of England declared, "Well, we won't annex any more territory." There were at that point of time about 560 odd princely states, sovereign states in the country, in the subcontinent. And the Queen simply said, it will suffice if the sovereign rulers of these states owe their allegiance to the British Crown. So one was the British provinces that had been ruled directly by the British right up till 1857. Other were the princely states who remained independent or quasi-independent. Internally, they were sovereign. Externally, they gave their allegiance to the British Crown. And this situation continued right up to 1947. So Jammu and Kashmir was one of those 560 princely states having a sovereign ruler. Now, we have read in our history books about the divide and rule policy. We have read about how Hindus and Muslims had their differences, not created by the British, and which were inevitable because they were different communities. But the books document, or the British Archives have been recently declassified, and they document the British strategy that while we did not create these differences, we must sharpen these differences. We must communalize India so that Hindus and Muslims can never reconcile. They would always need the British to resolve their issues. So that is something which has been documented by the British themselves in their archives, which I've detailed in the book, Unravelling the Kashmir Knot. So if anybody is really interested to see what was the colonial politics, it is all out there, documented, recorded by the British in the different memorandums, in the exchange of telegrams between the Viceroy and the Secretary of State, and so on and so forth. Now, this policy of communalizing the subcontinent took a different dimension with the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939. Britain declared India to be at war. The Indian National Congress, then the political party spearheading the Indian freedom movement, said, why should we be at war? We don't support Hitler, but we don't support you either. So why should we be at war? According to the British documents, the British archives, it was at that point of time that the British had decided to partition the subcontinent, not in 1947. Churchill had earlier, when in context of the 1935 Act, Government of India Act, had already said that India is no more a country than the equator. It can be cut into several parts. But the first serious, or amongst the first serious steps, time when there was an idea of partitioning the subcontinent came immediately after the Second World War, when the Indian National Congress decided not to cooperate with the British. There's a memorandum, for instance, excuse me, there's a memorandum which has been written in 1945, in 1940, it was 12th of March 1940 to be accurate. A telegram was sent by the Viceroy from India to the Secretary of State in the UK, saying, I've asked Zafrullah Khan, who was a member of the Viceroy Council, to draw the memorandum of Pakistan and India. So this memorandum was already there. Now, why did the British want to partition India? We have always been taught about the two-nation theory. We've been taught about Hindu-Muslims not being able to coexist and Muslims wanting a separate homeland, etc. The British archives tell a very different story. According to the British archives, partition was scripted by the British, and there was a reason for that. Britain knew they would have to leave India. The freedom movement had taken a lot of momentum. In fact, even before 1947, maybe a decade before that, India was already moving towards self-rule with elections and so on and so forth. So the British knew they would have to leave India. They could not afford to leave India because they were still fighting the great game, the precursor to the Cold War, with Soviet Russia. Britain wanted control into Central Asia. Britain did not want Soviet Russia to come towards the Middle East where the oil was there. So, like the Ottoman Empire, the British had used many devices to keep Russian influence away. And one of the devices was to use Islam as ideological boundary. So right from Turkey to China, if you see the world map, there's Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, the northwest frontier, northwest colonial frontier of the subcontinent, China, there's Islamic belt. The northwest frontier province, Gilgit-Baltistan region. These were the places, these fell within that Islamic crescent, which encircled in a way Soviet Russia. The British Chief of Staffs in the memorandum, which is documented in the archives, told the British government that for us, we need this territory, we need this slice of India for our own defense, geostrategic purposes. We must have a slice of India which now corresponds to Pakistan. the Northwest Frontier province part of it at least. So the idea was that we will have to leave the subcontinent, but we must keep a slice of India with us for our own purposes. That slice of India should be converted into a sovereign country, which should be friendly and pliable to the British, give them their territory for the great game against Soviet Russia. And so Pakistan itself was a British construct. And this is documented by the British themselves. So it's that narrative which is very important, which is not taught to us in our history books. Now, right from 1940s onwards, if you see all the constitutional plans, whether it is the Stafford-Cripps plan of 1942 or the Cabinet Mission plan of 1946, they all talk about the provincial option, that is any part of India could break away and have direct treaty relationships with Britain. The idea was to fracture the subcontinent. So these continued right up till with the Congress saying, we won't let you partition the subcontinent. The book documents how the British identified Jinnah to be the sole representatives of all Muslims. He was politically ambitious, secular but politically ambitious, with no grassroots support. I've documented how he was won over by the British to mouth the two-nation theory. The two-nation theory itself was sent to the Muslim League to be pronounced on 22nd of March 1940 from Lahore by Jinnah. So I've documented how Jinnah was nurtured by the British to formulate this theory and to demand Pakistan. When the Indian National Congress refused to accept partition, I've documented in the book how, with British complicity, Jinnah declared direct action, that is communal killings. He declared this on 27th of July 1946 from Mumbai. 16th August 1946 was to be direct action day, killings from Calcutta onwards. Of course, prior to this, the British had anyway drawn up the blueprint of partition. This plan was drawn up, blueprint was drawn up in the end of 1945. There's a telegram sent by the Viceroy to the Secretary of State of 6th of February 1946. These dates are important. 6th of February 1946, the telegram contains the blueprint of partition, which talks about India and Pakistan, which territory will go to India, which territory will go to Pakistan, and that is identical to the Radcliffe Award 18 months later, which means, in other words, Radcliffe Award was a farce. It had already been decided Gurdaspur will be in India, Calcutta would be in India, this part will be in Pakistan, in the blueprint of partition on 6th of February 1946. And then you had the direct action to give effect to that particular partition plan. The British troops went back into the barracks and the killing started from Calcutta, Bihar, spread all over the country. So by the time Mountbatten came to India in 1947, India was already in flames. And this violence is what made the Indian National Congress accept partition. So you have the 3rd June 1947 agreement, which got crystallized in British laws. Indian Independence Act 1947, the Government of India Act of 1935 was amended, and two dominions were to be created from 15th August 1947. But if we pause here, we'll see what was contemplated, and this is very important. Punjab and Assam had to be partitioned. There was a reason why Punjab had to be partitioned. The British wanted the Northwest Frontier province. That was 100% Muslim. No scope of divide and rule. So I've documented how the Congress always won elections there, with Gandhi supporting the Khilafat movement. I've documented the smoke screens created by the British to hold a referendum in Northwest Frontier province to choose between India or Islamic Pakistan, with the Congress abstaining to stand in that referendum. So less than 3 lakh people made Pakistan materialize. Now, with Northwest Frontier province going to Pakistan, Pakistan would not have been viable because Northwest Frontier province is a hilly area. They needed plains. It wouldn't be viable as a country. And so the fertile plains of West Punjab was required. And so the West Punjab had to be partitioned using two-nation theory. By the same logic, Bengal had to be partitioned. So referendum in North-East Frontier Province, partition of Punjab and Bengal. And this is reflected in the British statutes, which I talked about. And for the princely states, the cabinet mission, and of course reflected now in the statutes, was that the British sovereignty would lapse. In other words, each of the states would become sovereign in the full sense of the word. So J&K would be a sovereign country as of 15th August 1947. So would Hyderabad, so would Junagadh, so would the other states. Most states were of course told by to go to either India or Pakistan, saying interdependent, you can't survive as countries. And we had these three states only left, Hyderabad, Junagadh, J&K, which there was the issue whether they should go to India or Pakistan. Now, the British assumed that the Muslim majority J&K would go to Pakistan. They wanted Gilgit-Baltistan region. And when they J&K, and we all know about the tribal invasion in October 1947, forcing the hand of the ruler to come to India. As of 15th August 1947, J&K was not part of India. It was a sovereign country, and I don't say so. The Supreme Court of India, in a constitutional decision in Premnath Paul's case in 1959, has already held so that J&K was a sovereign country. J&K acceded to India on 26 October 1947, and it became an integral part of India. Accession of one sovereign country into another sovereign country is an act of state. It binds everybody. So J&K, the entire state, became an integral part of India, and it remains an integral part of India. J&K was never part of Pakistan. Now, when J&K acceded to India, this would have been fatal for the British purposes, because they wanted the Gilgit-Baltistan region. They had got the North-East Frontier Province. So they wanted the Gilgit-Baltistan region. They did not need the entire state. So I've documented again from British documents of 5 nights after the accession, that's the night of 31st October 1947, the Gilgit scouts took into custody the governor who had been appointed by the ruler of the state, which had become Indian territory. The British forces hoisted Pakistani flag on what was Indian territory and told Peshawar, you take it over. So in other words, according to British documents, the northern areas, Gilgit region, was carved out by the British from India. It had become Indian territory and handed over to Pakistan. Now the British had to undo the accession. So I've documented the politics, how the British decided that we must keep the door open for Pakistan. Mountbatten, I've documented him by saying that we decided to send VP Menon to J&K to see the situation. And by the time Menon came back, I had decided how I'll handle the situation. Mountbatten is on record as saying that I told Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, that I, as Governor General of India, will not sign on the accession instrument till you first commit to plebiscite. The idea was to keep the door open for Pakistan. So the idea was that you must first sign for reference to the people. And according to Mountbatten, Nehru replied, can't we wait till the raiders are thrown out? And according to Mountbatten, he said very well, I agree to that. But that was not good enough. The reference to the people or a promise of plebiscite was made to the people of J&K, which was still a part of India. So it was within India's domestic jurisdiction. I've documented how Mountbatten, at the instance of the British, leaned on Nehru to involve the United Nations so that on the pretext of stopping fighting, but the strategy was very simple. India would go to United Nations complaining of aggression against its territory. United Nations would say ceasefire without requiring Pakistan to vacate. Pakistan would get de facto control over Gilgit, retain de facto control over Gilgit-Baltistan, and later moved its army in May 1948. And this land would be made available by Pakistan to Britain for its great game against Soviet Russia. So the whole strategy was to involve United Nations so that there's an internationally recognized ceasefire line which enables Pakistan to retain de facto control of Indian territory and let British use it. The second strategy was that the United Nations Security Council would hold India to its promise of plebiscite, now under UN supervision, so that is fair, and say, we are bypassing the charge of aggression, let's have a plebiscite. And that this is precisely what happened in the United Nations Security Council. The United Nations was subverted. And I've recreated in the book what happened in the United Nations, how India was taken for a ride by the United Nations at the instance of Britain, and of course America and China chipping in. Now, we are the only country in history to have gone to the United Nations saying there's aggression on our territory and come back with a promise that we'll have a plebiscite to see whether this is even part of our country. And so that's the reason we are laughing stock as far as the world community is concerned. Through this mechanism, Pakistan consolidated its control over Gilgit-Baltistan region and the other territory, what is supposedly the Azad Kashmir. Now, if you recall, as per the British statutes, India was a dominion in 1957. We became republic only in 1950. So right from 15th August 1947 till 1950, the King of England was still the head. The officers heading Indian Army and Pakistan Army were British officers. They are the ones who decided that should India go to war against Pakistan to recover Gilgit region, India will liquidate Pakistan. So we need to create a buffer zone. So Azad Kashmir, the supposed Azad Kashmir, is this thin strip of territory separating India and Pakistan, lines being drawn by the British officers heading Indian and Pakistan armies to a buffer area to be kept free from Indian control, so that India does not attack Pakistan, or India is disabled from attacking Pakistan. So the two areas which are of J&K, which is in Pakistan's control till date, is the northern areas, Gilgit-Baltistan, and the so-called Azad Kashmir, and both areas is what we call Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Both these areas were earmarked in 1947 by the British, not Pakistan. They were earmarked by the British to be kept free from Indian control and handed over to Pakistan so that Pakistan could give those territories to Britain. Now, Nehru apparently realized that we've been taken for a ride by the United Nations. So there's a secret note of 25th of August 1952, which Nehru sent to Sheikh Abdullah, the popular leader in J&K, in which he said, 4 years ago, only I realized that plebiscite is not an option. The United Nations is being subverted. So it ruled out plebiscite in 1948 itself. War is not an option because they are the heights. We can't get back our territory. So let them keep what they have. We'll keep what they have. In other words, territorial status quo. So New Delhi took the easy way out in 1947, 1948. It disowned Indian territory and the people on it. People who are constitutionally Indian citizens till date. But India disowned them by saying let Pakistan keep what they have, we keep what we have. In 1957, India told the United Nations Security Council that we don't believe in re-agitating the matters, let sleeping dogs lie. In 1965, the Indian Army, the brave soldiers got back Hajipir, Indian territory. India returned Indian territory to Pakistan at Tashkent in 1966. We have the Shimla Agreement, inviolability of the ceasefire line. Lahore Declaration, inviolability of the ceasefire line. There's a Parliament resolution saying we must get POK, but till date, we have not taken any steps towards that end. On the contrary, should somebody, there was this case about this woman who was being beaten by her husband in POK. She fell in the river Jhelum, came on this side of the river, constitutionally Indian citizen, because J&K was never part of Pakistan. Indian security forces pick her up and hand over this Indian citizen to Pakistan security forces. Even the surgical strikes, if we talk about, the distinction between Pakistan territory and POK has been blurred. We are doing surgical strikes on our own territory. POK is Indian territory. So the point is that we have followed a policy of territorial status quo unofficially, which now gets translated into LOC, into the international border, disowning our people and our territory, so that even those people, after so many generations, even they've lost their consciousness of being Indian citizens. In India, we don't even think about it, that a chunk of India is under foreign rule. We have a part of India which is under foreign rule. It's not even in a political discourse. We are focusing only on the territory which is with us. Now, the policy of New Delhi seems to be that forget about United Nations, we now need to make it bilateral. International community has got nothing to do with it. So by doing that, we're giving standing on Pakistan, and of course, we're ignoring China. New Delhi discovered in late 1950s that China has creeped into Sichuan, occupied that territory, built a road through Sichuan, Indian territory. We discovered this from Chinese maps. In 1963, Pakistan cheekily gives Indian territory, part of J&K, to China under the 1963 treaty. So today, China holds about 20% of J&K. Pakistan holds about 35% of J&K. We have the rest. We still say it's a bilateral issue. We ignore China's role. And we don't take any steps. So even when Pakistan and China are conceiving the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, part of the biggest part of the One Belt, One Road initiative, the OBR, this CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is being conceived through Gilgit-Baltistan, through Indian territory. China is putting millions of dollars there. They're building tunnels, laying on optic fibers. We're doing nothing about it, apart from formal protest. Even the recent issue when China is sitting in Ladakh, they're encroaching, it's like salami technique, coming more and more into Indian territory and gobbling that up. What are we doing about it, apart from maintaining LAC and LOC and making protests? So the situation today is that the former state, which is Indian territory, is in part of it, more than 50% is in control of two sovereign countries. And there's a political stalemate, with New Delhi having promised plebiscite, self-determination, and having gone to the United Nations and said, let's have a plebiscite. In other words, it is New Delhi which has, when the state came to us unconditionally, is New Delhi which accepted it provisionally subject to a plebiscite. It's New Delhi which internationalized the Kashmir issue. It's New Delhi which gave a disputed territory tag on J&K. It's New Delhi which has let people say it's not Indian territory. Outside India, we can say it's an integral part of India, but outside India, every map shows the entire state, former state, to be disputed territory. Without getting rid of the dispute, we are focusing only on part of the territory with us. So we try to control the law and order through ASPA. We try to integrate that territory by getting rid of 370. And we say that's a Kashmir issue. I'm sorry, Kashmir issue is not 370. Kashmir issue is recovering the entire territory which is Indian, getting back our people, getting rid of this disputed territory tag. In other words, Kashmir issue is getting back POK, is getting back China, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, China occupied J&K. Kashmir issue is to get back the entire former state, to get rid of the disputed territory tag and get the world community to say this is Indian territory. Kashmir issue is not the valley. Valley is just 9% of the entire state, former state. Kashmir issue is not cross-border terrorism only. What may be, take a situation. I have a house. Then tomorrow, I have the title to that house. Tomorrow I say, I'm not too sure of my own title. It's provisional title I have. Somebody gets in, I say, please get out. They say, you don't know your own title. So I say, this is a terrorist movement. They say it's a freedom struggle. Who will decide? But till I confirm my title, can you really say, would not the other person say, this is a freedom struggle? You need to first clear your title. You first need to get to confirm your title. And which is the reason, according to me, nothing will work in Kashmir. Nothing will ever work in Kashmir till you first get rid of your disputed territory tag, till you first get your title deeds confirmed by the at the international stage, so that no country in the world can say J&K is disputed territory. You need the international community for that. But why would the international community support us? But each one will play politics. So that is why in the book I've documented to say that today there's a political stalemate between India, Pakistan and China. You do not have a political solution. You do not have a diplomatic solution. You do not have a military solution. You do not have an economic solution. The only solution which we have today is in law, using international law to break a political stalemate. The law, think about it, you had the British statutes which created India and Pakistan. India may be a very, very ancient civilization, but modern day India and Pakistan are creations of these statutes. So there's no doubt of the legitimacy of India and Pakistan. They both are creations of the British statutes. We could have done away with it. We chose not to. So there's no doubt of the legitimacy of India and Pakistan, recognized as sovereign countries by the United Nations. Now, as per this law, the ruler became sovereign on the lapse of British paramountcy on 15th August 1947. So J&K was a sovereign country with the ruler being the sovereign, not the people. There was still a monarch. According to the constitutional law, which is the Indian Independence Act and the Government of India Act as amended, according to this constitutional law creating India and Pakistan, it was a ruler alone who could decide to come to India or Pakistan. The ruler chose to come to India. If that is the position, and that accession being an act of state, the ruler unconditionally comes to India, then from where did New Delhi get the power in 1947 to lay down a contrary policy that people will decide the future of the state? Was that not unconstitutional? Was that not ultra-virus? Can the executive clothe itself with authority by making promises which are inconsistent with its own constitution? The executive is created by this constitutional law. The then Government of India in 1947 was created by the Government of India Act 1947, 1935, and the 1947 Act. Those acts said the ruler will decide. Can New Delhi say people will decide? And if not, was that promise of plebiscite or reference to the people itself ultra-virus? Now, the same law created Pakistan. Pakistan cannot say we don't recognize this constitutional law. If they say we don't recognize the Indian Independence Act, we don't recognize the Government of India Act, there is no Pakistan because Pakistan was part of India. The minute they say we accept this constitutional law, then it's fair to say that the very law which created Pakistan made J&K a part of India, because J&K acceded to India in terms of the same law. So the proposition is very simple. We need to go to a court of law to say, did not the law which created India and Pakistan itself make J&K, which acceded to India in terms of this law, a part of India? And if so, is not the presence of Pakistan and China on Indian territory aggression? The only court which has the authority, whose views are authoritative, which are binding, is ICJ. We have gone to the international. We have gone to the Security Council, which is a political body. But what prevents us to refer to the ICJ limited issues? We have a Commonwealth reservations. We don't need to refer everything. But what prevents us from referring to the ICJ? A simple proposition to confirm India's title deeds to J&K. And should the ICJ say that as per the very law which created India and Pakistan, J&K is a part of India, then you have Namibia's decision, you have Nicaragua's decision, what the legal consequences. Presence of Pakistan and China go to mount aggression, they would have to vacate. The international mechanism comes in. Even assuming there's international politics, even assuming it's difficult to enforce it, but at least you got a finding in law that the entire J&K is a part of India. It changes the political discourse. You're able to go back to the people of J&K and say you're Indian citizens. No injustice has been done if there was no plebiscite. There was no plebiscite in the other princely states. We need to change the political discourse, national and international, on the Kashmir issue. It's not a tussle of territory. It is a political issue, but it has legal elements. India must separate the legal from the political, get a finding in law that the entire state is Indian territory, so as to build a political opinion. Public opinion has more force than law. You can't control territory by force or by laws. You need to have people with you. You need to have public opinion with you. So the idea of going to the ICJ is not to say you get a finding, Kashmir issue will be resolved. It's nobody's case that law can resolve the Kashmir issue. Nobody's saying that. But law can alter the political discourse on the Kashmir issue so that we get the moral right to say we're entitled to be here. Because we are the ones who internationalize the Kashmir issue. We are the ones who gave a disputed territory tag. So we are the ones which must get rid of this disputed territory tag. Playing a devil's advocate, what if the ICJ says no, which is what the people were relevant? Very well. There's no loss because it does not follow J&K becomes part of Pakistan or becomes independent. India's traditional stand is that we have anyway taken the consent of the people through its Constituent Assembly. There's a 1954 resolution of the State Constituent Assembly, which was an elected body, saying the people of J&K want to be a part of India. So we fall back on our existing stand that the people anyway have decided to be part of India. So we have ascertained the wishes. We don't lose anything. So if we win everything. If we lose nothing. And so we need to depoliticize the Kashmir issue. 370 is only attached, is only a mechanism to give effect to the terms of the instrument of accession. To go back in point of time, the ruler was sovereign in 1947. India was to become a republic. You can't have a monarch, a sovereign ruler in a republic. So there had to be a transfer of power. There had to be a transition of government. The ruler had to give up his power. Because there had to be that transition, and that transition had to be through a state elected state constituent assembly, which was eventually set up in 1951. Elections had to be held, the body had to be constituted, that body was to decide within the Constitution of India what would be the constitutional relationship of the state with India. The Constituent Assembly had to decide the form of government in the particular state. And it said it would be an autonomous republic within the Union of India. Because all this happened to had to happen. In 1947, you had a sovereign. That transition had yet to happen from the monarch through a state court assembly, through the transfer of power to the people. It is for that reason 370 was a temporary provision, not because it had to go, but because it was a transitional provision. And 370 basically says only this much, that whatever powers have been given by the ruler to New Delhi, you just consult the state. Whatever powers have not been given, let the state court assembly take the consent of the state. And if you want to get rid of this provision, get a recommendation from the state court assembly. That's what 370 says. But basically, J&K was a sovereign country coming to India unconditionally but in limited areas to get more powers, take the consent of the state. So it was for the state to decide how much to integrate with India. It was part of India, but how much to integrate India, because the state never gave full powers. The Supreme Court of India itself has held that the ruler retained his powers despite accession with respect to the areas he had not given. He gave only external affairs, defense and communications. So the ruler was still sovereign. The Constitutional Assembly would decide what else to give, if at all. The state refused to execute an instrument of merging the territory of J&K into the union. So for other states, Article 3 said consult the state legislature. For J&K, Article 3 had another proviso: you must take the consent of the state legislature. So there were those safeguards. The distinctions were there, but the point is throughout. And then you have the Delhi Agreement, which talked about the state having preferential powers for its own residents. So 370, the Instrument of Accession, 370, Delhi Agreement, 1954 Order, the Supreme Court decisions all said one simple thing. It is for the people of the state to decide their relationship with the Indian Union, not the other way around. And it is in that context this whole challenge has come, what has happened on 5th of August 2020, and let us see what the Supreme Court says. I'm not getting into that since it's sub judice. But that is the whole concept of 370. But what we are doing is the fallout of our stand on J&K, of accepting the accession provisionally, creating a disputed territory tag, the policy of territorial status quo, LOC into the international border, disowning our people and our territory, focusing only on the part of the territory with us. The fallout of all this is that we have equated the Kashmir issue with 370. And that's how I started. The genesis of the Kashmir issue is not Article 370. The resolution of the Kashmir issue is not Article 370. To resolve Kashmir issue, we need to do more than disown our people and our territory. We need to get rid of the disputed territory tag, and we need to get back our people and our territory. And we need to do it in a way which is legal, which is constitutional. And the only way perhaps left is to go into the ICJ. So that is what is my take on the Kashmir issue. I know it is an unconventional take. Our approach has been wrong from 1947 till 2020. Our approach has to be, we have to adopt a very different approach if we ever hope to bring down the violence, bring peace, bring some kind of rule of law, some kind of semblance of accountability. We need to have a very, very different approach. And so for that reason, according to me, whatever's happened is unfortunate, but whatever's happened in J&K, the policies we've been following are so misconceived that they are irrelevant in trying to resolve the Kashmir issue. With that, I'll stop because I was told to speak for about 15 minutes. And of course, now I'll be happy to take question answers from whoever would like me to repeat something or clarify something.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a very insightful session. We have few questions from the chat box. One is from Mahesh Kumar. He asked what diplomatic efforts to be made by India or strike is the only option to get back POK.
You see, the thing is, before we make a diplomatic effort, we must be very clear of what we want. If the diplomatic effort is to convert LOC into the national border, ignore CPEC, ignore OBOR, let China keep consolidating its control, and let China force Pakistan to accept LOC international border. Pakistan has no right on even an inch of Indian territory or on an inch of J&K. Pakistan has no locus standi. A sovereign J&K acceded to a sovereign India. A third state can't veto that accession. So Pakistan has no locus standi on J&K. We have given Pakistan locus standi by saying it's a bilateral issue and making party to the Kashmir issue. Now, Pakistan has gobbled up or taken 35% and is wanting the rest also. New Delhi's policy seems to be is LOC into the national border unofficially. Officially, we have the parliament resolution saying Pakistan must vacate POK. But unofficially, LOC into national border. If our diplomatic challenge is to get China to lean on Pakistan to do LOC into national border, and we say, well, we've got rid of the Kashmir issue, then our policy itself is misconceived. So before we even go to the international community, we must first have the correct policy. The states which are with India are not going to support India, which are against us are not going to support us. Even the states which are with us must know what to support us, what support they have to give us on what issue, what stand. Our diplomatic stand, you see, our entire foreign service, because of the lessons we were taught in international politics in 1947-48, we have generations of people in the foreign service who are so scared to go back to the international stage that you need to decondition them. You need to first explain to them that your entire foreign policy on J&K is misconceived. And first we need to set that in order, and then we can probably take a diplomatic push to do it. But yet another way of having a diplomatic push is the finding from the ICJ, which says the entire J&K is a part of India. If we get that finding, we can use it as a diplomatic tool to persuade Pakistan and China to vacate, and we can use that to get the international community to pressurize Pakistan and China. So we need to get a tool, and that tool, according to me, is a finding in law.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is from Abhishek Tiwari. He asks, sir, what according to you and how can India and Pakistan mitigate this Kashmir issue?
I'm sorry, how can India and Pakistan
mitigate the Kashmir issue together?
Well, the point is, you see, there are several things out here. There are several levels out here. There's a genuine feeling in Pakistan that India's cheated Pakistan of J&K. And the reason for that is they felt that Muslim majority contiguous to Pakistan, they should anyway go to J&K should go to Pakistan. K in Pakistan is actually stands for Kashmir. Apart from that, they feel India has taken Junagadh and Hyderabad by one policy. Just to give a bit of background about that. I've talked about most princely states going between India and Pakistan, choosing between India and Pakistan. There were only 3 states where we had disputed accessions. One was Junagadh, where you had a Muslim ruler, Hindu majority population, and then you had Hyderabad, again Muslim ruler, Hindu majority population. Reverse than what it was in J&K. Now, Junagadh acceded to Pakistan. Junagadh is right in between the Kathiawar states. It could never be part of Pakistan. But Junagadh, the ruler of Junagadh acceded to Pakistan. And many people have written about how Jinnah laid a trap for Indian National Congress to formulate a policy that where the rulers of one community and the people are of the other community, people will decide. The Muslim League could not have formulated that policy because the Muslim League had said that India is not even ready for democracy. So it had to be the Indian National Congress to formulate that policy, and the idea was to make Congress formulate that policy. So the ruler of Junagadh accedes to Pakistan. The Diwan and the ruler of Junagadh sitting in Karachi asked the government of India to hold a plebiscite in the state to see whether people want to be with India and Pakistan. And since Junagadh has a relevance for Hindu mythology, India agrees. India holds a plebiscite and says Junagadh is part of India. Hyderabad wanted to be independent the way J&K wanted to be independent. J&K did not want to come to India or Pakistan. According to Pakistan, India moved the troops into Hyderabad, which is the size of France, held a plebiscite while taking the Nizam into custody, and said Pakistan, the people want to be part of India. Both Junagadh and Hyderabad issues went to the United Nations Security Council, and there India said, we have held a plebiscite, people want to be with India. And Pakistan took the stand, very well. So your formulated policy, where the rulers of one community, people are of the other community, people will decide, apply the same principle now to J&K. And when India says, we will not have plebiscite because you're not vocated, we will not have plebiscite because of change of situation of change, there's a genuine feeling in Pakistan that India has taken Junagadh and Hyderabad by one principle and is denying Kashmir the same principle. Now, two wrongs don't make a right, and in Junagadh, Hyderabad, the rulers had a say in it at some point or the other. So we can distinguish, but if you see inequity, there's a feeling of injustice. Their children are taught from childhood that to demonize India, to say how terrible India is. They are taught that Pakistan is part of West Asia. They're not part of the subcontinent. In India, children are taught to demonize Pakistan, to say that they're out here to create problem. So when you have generations which are brought up on hate, on misinformation, with historical facts not being told, then it's very difficult for India and Pakistan to mitigate anything, to negotiate anything, because they're prejudiced. The whole trauma of partition is there. We've not had a National Reconciliation Council. So to overcome the trauma of partition, the British divided India into artificial lines, Pakistan and India, which later became Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. We all are the same people. But they did it in such a way that we were killing each other. Not a single European was injured, was attacked. So 2 million people were butchered, 14 million displaced. So the entire subcontinent has been taken for a ride. So unless you overcome the trauma of partition, you take away your whole sense of pseudo-nationalism, you try to decondition people, you try to break down the feeling of hate amongst each other, it's very difficult for India and Pakistan to actually resolve anything amicably. And so that's the reason why I say go the legal route. And if that happens, and this is British politics was, if somebody reads a book, I'll talk, it is parallel drawn to what happened in the Middle East, creation of Turkey, with the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. Here you have East India Company, there you have Levant Company. Here you had Jinnah, there you have Shirvi Hussain leading the Arab revolt. Here you have detachment into India, Pakistan, there Kuwait, Palestine. Here you have the Indian Muslims who have to say we are patriotic. There you have the Armenians in the same problem. Here you had the exchange of population between India and Pakistan, there between Greece and Turkey. So here, artificial boundaries on religious lines. There on sectarian lines, Shia and Sunni. Identical colonial politics followed by the British few decades apart in the Middle East and the subcontinent, which shows the entire partition was scripted. So unless these facts are in the public domain, unless you try to get rid of this kind of environment of hostility, we will be going on and on against each other. So that's the reason, according to me, except for the legal route, I don't see any other way of resolving this kind of an issue.
Thank you, sir. There's a question from Vibhu Tripathi that China is well known for its expansionist behavior. Even if India established peaceful existence in Jammu and Kashmir, whether or not China's CPEC and string of pearls will be a constant threat to whole of the North India and particularly the two union territories.
It would, because for the simple reason that you're right, they have this, they have all, not only they're even eating into Nepal. They're taking over some villages there. So But that is precisely the point. CPEC runs through Indian territory. If India goes to the ICJ and we are able to win a case and get back Gilgit-Baltistan, we can actually influence CPEC. We can then negotiate with China new terms. So it is all the more reason why we must get back Gilgit-Baltistan so that we are in a position to actually impede or block or renegotiate the terms of CPEC. We become a necessary party out there. Right now we are excluded because that territory is Indian territory, which is being occupied by Pakistan, and through that this optic fibers are being laid to disseminate Chinese culture, etc. So the point is, if you see India-China dispute, LSC is yet to be demarcated. China is deliberately not demarcating it because according to them, Aksai-Chin is part of China and they want to eat more and more into Ladakh. And they say we have taken over in Arunachal, etc. China will become more flexible if you're able to block CPEC. And we can block CPEC if we get the physical control of our own territory in Gilgit-Baltistan. So by doing that, we are killing two birds with the same stone. We are sorting out this dispute with Pakistan, and we are able to block or facilitate the CPEC, which will make China more flexible for Aksai-Chin and even on the eastern flank of the LSC when it comes to Arunachal. In today's world, war is not an option. It's very difficult to change political boundaries because conquest has anyway been outlawed by force. The only way of changing political boundaries is through a legal finding and building a political environment around it, through diplomacy later on. Law alone can't do anything. The strong point we have is that law is on our side, whether it comes to Pakistan, whether it comes to China's aggression. And so we must use that as a tool to then build a political environment.
Thank you so much, sir. Amit Kumar asked that why have we not gone to ICJ yet? Is there any difficulty going there?
You see, the point is that I started researching on this issue in 1995 at the instance of my father, who was a lawyer in 1944 and a prosecutor in Sindh in 1946. So he knew the principles underlying partition and the state of affairs which was going on. Nobody has come up with this idea of ICJ from 1947 to 1995. It was part of my doctoral research I gave in 2001 when I proposed it, that we should go to ICJ. The reason for this is that the Indian establishment is scared of going back to the international stage, given the way we were backstabbed in 1948 by the United Nations. So the instant reaction is, don't internationalize the Kashmir issue. Try to make it bilateral. Try to control the damage. Even if you have to give away our territory in POK. So one is a mindset. When this book was released in 2016, at that point of time, we had the Atlantic case. And in an Atlantic case, ICJ has laid down the whole issue of jurisdiction. That Pakistan in 1960 had given its consent to the compulsory jurisdiction of the ICJ. And India has got its Commonwealth reservations. Commonwealth reservations basically mean that if you have a dispute with a Commonwealth country, ICJ will not get jurisdiction unless you waive off those reservations. So India in Atlantic case said we're not waiving off our reservation. In view of Commonwealth reservation, ICJ has no power to see a dispute, hear a dispute between India and Pakistan. So the proposition which was laid down was India can choose what it wants to refer to ICJ because of its Commonwealth reservations. Pakistan is anyway given its consent to the jurisdiction under Article 36(2) of the statute of the ICJ. When I written this book initially, the first edition, actually I formulated 8 questions and said India should refer these 8 propositions of law to the ICJ while blocking every attempt to expand the scope of inquiry. We don't want to get into other issues being raised by Pakistan. We want to, either propositions were calculated only on the issue of title of India to J&K and presence of Pakistan and China being in J&K as being aggression. So it was confined only to that limited aspect. Within a year, in less than a year of the book being released, Pakistan, before India did what I had suggested, Pakistan withdrew its 1960 resolution giving consent to the ICJ. So the problem now is we cannot go to the ICJ unilaterally. We would need the consent of Pakistan. But in the book which I've written, which the 2017 edition, I've dealt with this issue about how now we can go to the ICJ, rooted through Article 36 of the Charter, where the Security Council is